This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 7th of June 2025. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with the journalist and Monocle Radio regular politics commentator Vincent McAviney. Then we'll hear from Kremer and Rosalind Porter of Notting Hill Editions, the London publisher that calls itself the home of the essay. All of that coming up here on Monocle on Saturday. First, though, here's the news. Russia launched over 400 drones in a sweeping overnight assault on Ukraine, targeting key infrastructure and urban centres. Kyiv's air defences were activated, with officials reporting significant damage but no confirmed casualties yet. Brazil's Amazon rainforest suffered a 92% increase in deforestation in May compared to the same month last year, alarming environmentalists. The spike comes just days before critical UN climate negotiations, putting pressure on Brazil's environmental policies. Former allies Donald Trump and Elon Musk are now publicly clashing over trade policies and tax reforms. The spat has intensified, with Musk's daughter mocking the feud and Trump hinting at reviewing federal contracts with Musk's companies. And Japan's oldest man has just turned 116 and credits his longevity to daily baths and avoiding politicians. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm joined in the studio by the journalist and Monocle Radio regular politics commentator Vincent McAviney. Good morning to you, Vinny.
Good morning.
Avoiding politicians,
we're not following that advice this morning with our stories, I'm afraid.
Do you know, it's just, past the popcorn, really. This is just extraordinary what's going on in the US right now. Have you been able to look away?
It's hard not to, but as I think, like a lot of people, you have to sort of taper. You know, Donald Trump wants to be in your life 24/7. He wants to be an enforced reality star on all of us. And sometimes you just have to sort of shut off from it and ignore it. But it is hard because it has real world economic impacts. We saw that if you're a shareholder of Tesla, the stock absolutely plummeted. Elon Musk has come out heavily against Trump's tariffs. Where does it leave all of that now as he struggles to strike any deals? I mean, it is, and just, the drama of it. It is Real Housewives of Palm Springs and the Oval Office.
Yeah, as you say, a reality show in which we're all forced to be unwitting kind of contestants.
Completely. Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, it is really fascinating. I mean, Donald Trump is slightly... there's a really good piece in the New York Times, Trump as channel changer in chief. And it's about when he gets stuck in a really intractable, issue like Ukraine, like Israel and Gaza, in the campaign, day one, they'll be solved. It's, almost 150 days, very much not solved, very much worse on both fronts. And all he does is sort of pivot into things like talking about the new ballroom that he's going to build in the White House that, presidents apparently have always wanted, but he's the man to deliver it. And, talking about other things. And part of that was, turning to... when he was with Friedrich Merz this week, he just sort of was talking and said, did someone say auto pen? And then started sort of his mad theory about how Biden used auto pen to sign bills so he can kind of undo it all. And obviously as well, bringing up Elon Musk on in this meeting. And, there are some funny pieces today about how, are men too emotional for leadership? Is this sort of... this sort of big split in a bromance, what it will do to the MAGA movement. In terms of where it goes now, I mean... Elon Musk is a match for Donald Trump. He likes attention just as much, and he's as good at getting it. He has more money than Donald Trump does.
But he's not commander-in-chief of the...
He's not commander-in-chief, so he can't control that. But he is someone who can cause a lot of problems for him, probably more than anyone has done previously.
I mean, there's a lot of speculation whether he would perhaps shift his support to the Democrats, who he has supported previously, or perhaps even a brand new party. I wonder, though, if the Democrats would welcome him. I mean, of course, his money would be good, but he's such damaged goods.
Yeah, I mean, he was a lightning rod for all kinds of issues, and he has clearly expressed some views which I think on issues of race and other things would not sit well with the Democrats in their sort of broad tent strategy. But I don't think he would pivot back to them. I think he just wants to I think he's learned his lesson now. He is someone who thinks he knows everything, but I think even he maybe has realized that traditional politics is not his game, given he's lost probably more money than anyone in the history of the world has since the election. Why stick around and do that? Why not sort of focus on what you actually want to do, which is, get people to Mars and build electric cars?
Yeah. And I mean, that the whole Tesla collapse has been spectacular.
It had its second biggest fall in a day since about 2020. I mean, if you think about how tumultuous that period has been, the Ukraine war, the pandemic, and this all came from not being able to maintain a relationship. And it was really interesting in January when Trump kind of came back to power. I did sense that there was a little bit too much of a kind of valedictoriness in the coverage of him, that he was this was it was going to be his time, and he had learned his lessons and all of this kind of stuff. People in their late 70s don't learn lessons. They very much are the people that they are. They do not change. And the idea that he was this time going to come back with some crack team, and it was going to be, he was going to have learned how to run things, and it was going to be a lot calmer and a lot more consistent. That's clearly not the case. We might not have seen the sort of big departures that we saw in the first term, where the staff was constantly changing because they refused to do what he said, and he's surrounded by sycophants, but they are getting caught up in the courts, and the relationship with Musk. Musk found, like everyone else that's ever got involved with Donald Trump, that eventually it's you that gets burnt. But whereas people like Michael Cohen or whoever, who they can sort of be antagonists, there's no one who can be a kind of big central villain in the life of Donald Trump like Elon Musk can be. That he's not come across someone who's got this scale of fortune and influence. He has his own large social media empire to turn on him. And things like talking about the Epstein files, that really has gone, you're sort of watching in real time MAGA base try to process this, because that is a big obsession of theirs. And they're sort of trying to hold these two thoughts in their mind, that Donald Trump is somehow involved, and that's something I really care about, allegedly, and think we need to get to the bottom of.
On the Epstein files, though, we knew that Trump knew him, that those documents existed. They were in the public
video
realm.
footage. Exactly. But it's whether or not it's sort of how close a relationship the two of them did have.
Just before we move on from the story, and I'm quite sure we'll be circling back to it at some point, I want to talk about this 22-year-old staffer.
Oh, this is quite remarkable. I mean, sometimes if you sort of come across, sort of Gen Z, and he might even be Gen Alpha now entering the workforce, but, sometimes confidence is not a problem, I would say. And this is a 22-year-old graduate with no previous government leadership or security experience. He has only done internships and had what he described as a landscape gardening business. But when you go down on his LinkedIn, it's clearly that he was just sort of mowing some neighbours' lawns.
And what's his job now?
And this is Thomas Folgate, and he describes himself as a Trump publican, and he is now leading a government terror prevention team. So this is literally putting the intern in charge. He's got quite a remarkable profile photo. He previously was at sort of right-wing apparatus like the Heritage Foundation as an intern, always just as an intern, and now he's in a serious government agency with a serious government brief. And zero experience in this. It is kind of, it does lead you back to, why do empires often fall? If you go back to Rome, it's because the sort of corruption and carelessness has just become so complacent.
Yeah. And I mean, this now lends weight to this headline in The Guardian. Russia is at war with Britain and US is no longer a reliable ally. That's what Fiona Hill is saying. We'll go into that story in a moment. But clearly with this 22-year-old with no experience in this incredibly responsible position, how can the US be a reliable ally?
Well, that's what you've got to wonder. And I think that's why, when you look at the intelligence alliance, Five Eyes, which is Canada, it's basically the Anglosphere powers. It's sort of Canada, the US, the UK, New Zealand and Australia. They already had grave concerns about Tulsi Gabbard's position in the administration, sort of the role that she has got in security. And there was talk going into the new Trump administration that, the other members of, Five Eyes might collapse. The other four members might not feel that the US is responsible enough with intelligence information. Tulsi Gabbard is very close with Putin previously and, supported the Assad regime. And you just think, how can you share intelligence with people like this? Particularly as there is a very clear pipeline of these people leaving their jobs, setting up YouTube channels or podcasts or whatever, and revealing information that was never meant to be revealed. So it creates huge problems.
Tell us what Fiona Hill has been saying.
Well, Fiona Hill's really remarkable. She comes from County Durham, which is in the northeast of England, and it's one of the poorest areas in the country. And she ended up getting scholarships at universities and going and living in the US for 30 years. She was a dual national. And now she's sort of back located in the UK. She's chancellor of my old university, Durham University. And she, you might remember her from the first Trump administration. She was a national security advisor. She ended up in the impeachment trial when it came to the Ukrainian one. She has basically now sort of got a role advising the UK government. And she says point blank in this piece, that's in The Guardian, Russia is at war with Britain and the US is no longer a reliable ally. And she talks about the fact that back in 2015, she said that Putin had turned against the West. She wrote a report saying that he was, now minded to, work against the West, and he wasn't interested in the kind of the early term stuff that he thought of. He just wants to sort of menace the West in various ways. And she says, some people sort of, laughed at, sort of disagreed with her position then, saying it was too hyperbolic. And now she's saying, this is very true. Look at what Russia's doing with the UK, menacing it in various ways. Sabotage operations, poisonings, assassinations, cyber attacks and influence operations, sensors that they're putting down around critical subsea cables. I thought it was very interesting that in the defence review, Britain is pivoting more towards underwater defence rather than ships with these sort of new attack submarines, because there are huge concerns about the vulnerability of subsea cables, which are incredibly hard, if not impossible, to defend. And if you took down, some of these cables that go between the United States, the UK and Europe, you would throw the global economy into the kind of chaos that we've not really seen before.
You mentioned the review. So this is the Strategic Defence Review, which was published earlier this week. It says the UK's long-standing assumptions about global power balances and structures are no longer certain. And it really goes on to unpack what the situation is. And it's extremely worrying.
Yeah, massively. And we saw exactly how the game has changed just last week. That incredible drone attack that Ukraine managed to mount, for relatively little cost. We're talking in a couple of million. It took down billions of dollars of Russian military equipment, jets and bombers and everything else. And this idea now that, you could be swarmed with these quite cheap, easy to make drones that can, in a very rudimentary way, just by sort of dropping munitions, essentially, they can take down these sophisticated multi-million-dollar planes. It's just clear evidence that, the game has changed. Technology must be updated. And you're working in these sort of, not always kinetic, but these, roundabout ways. It's this sort of idea that Putin has played at home in Russia for many years, which he's now playing on the world. And it comes from avant-garde theatre. There's a sort of guy that Putin has consulted with in the past, who was an avant-garde theatre director. And it's basically the idea is that if the scenery is constantly changing and you can't tell really who's good, who's bad, what's up, what's down, you make people very scared and make them act irrationally. And that's the sort of thing that he has exported around the world. And that people, if you're running influence operations and trying to manipulate things and events on social media, people just start to get so bewildered that they don't know what to trust. And that's part of what this package is going to have to, the UK is going to have to increase its military spending, we think, up to about 3.5%, 3%. And part of that is going to have to be tackling the sort of cyber threat as well. And it's so complicated to get your head around that I think Fiona Hill is sort of ringing as loud an alarm bell as she can, because there are really tough decisions about what we spend money on, and defence, it seems, is not something we can skip on. The defence review coming here in the UK, the spending review coming in a few days' time here in the UK, this big kind of government audit, and it's very clear that we can't now skip on security. There was, years where you could take the peace dividend, and now the argument is you've got to take the war dividend, which is creating jobs in new technology, in munitions, because the threats have just got so big.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this is going to mean tax rises. We're also looking at Mark Rutte, who's, of course, the head of NATO, coming to Britain, I think, later on this month. And he's really pushing for 5% of GDP. And it's unclear at the moment whether that's as a sop to Donald Trump, who, of course, wants that, or if he feels that this is definitely the only way to go.
Yeah, we've got Mark Rutte hosting the NATO conference as well in the Netherlands and later this month. And it feels like, from what he said, what he said, I think, at the Munich Security Conference and other speeches, I think it's not just a sop to Trump anymore. I think it's just the fact that the sort of backbone of NATO, which was the sort of US backstop, is now not guaranteed. And even when you look at sort of, this isn't just a sort of Trump thing, and he's, I want people to pay the bills, says a man who's stiffed every contractor who's ever worked on one of his properties. This is looking at the lines coming out of the likes of J.D. Vance and that sort of tier below the sort of possible candidates, Kristi Noem, popping up at the sort of CPAC in Hungary and sort of wading into the Polish election to support the far-right candidate, Elon Musk back in the FD. There is a real kind of wave in that sort of rank of Republicans that's not interested in helping Europe, that wants to antagonize Europe, that has strange conceptions about it. And I think part of it comes from the tech firms that fund these candidates don't like EU regulation, and so they are propping them up to attack European institutions and things like that. And it just does lead to, I think, Mark Rutte, who is a very experienced politician, Prime Minister of the Netherlands for a decade, thinking that we have to go beyond the sort of minimum 2% now to make sure, and it has to be integrated.
And so he'll be in London on Monday and sort of setting up for that on The Globalist first thing Monday morning here on Monocle Radio. We'll be talking to Dr. Marion Messmer, who was part of drafting that review, and we'll be looking at all of that defence.
I was on the Daily with her this week. I think it was Tuesday's episode, Tuesday or Wednesday's episode. Very interesting doctor. She was part of the review, and she has some really good points to make, so well worth tuning in for more of her on The Globalist.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, can we talk about some books now? So thousands of books flood the market each week. One small London publisher, however, is taking a different approach. Notting Hill Editions publishes just 6 carefully chosen titles each year, calling themselves the home of the essay. The company was founded by Tom Kremer, who is famous for bringing the Rubik's Cube to the world, who started this publishing house at age 80. When he died in 2017, his daughter Kim Kremer took over, continuing his mission to create beautiful books celebrating fine writing and original thinking. Well, Kim is now the managing director of the company, and I'm joined by both her and the publisher Rosalind Porter. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Kim, tell us more about the background to the company and the link to Rubik's Cube.
Sure. It's lovely to be on. So I'm not sure if I can link it very much to the Rubik's Cube, except that I think my father had a feeling for what would work. It sort of built into his bones. And he wasn't afraid to go against the trends. At the time, in 2011, people were saying, well, hardbacks, no one's really wanting them. Cheap paperbacks are on the rise, ebooks. And he really wanted to go against that and celebrate the art of the essay, which he always loved, and also just create beautiful books that he was sure people would still want to have and to hold and to treasure. So it was distinct from the beginning.
How would you define an essay?
So an essay is a way of testing out an idea, and it's been submerged by this idea of the academic essay, but the literary essay in its original form was a way for writers to think through, almost thinking through on the page. And it can explore a really complex idea in an accessible way. The way my father put it was that the essay fits into that middle space between journalism, which it tends to be more surface skimming, and academia, which goes very deeply, perhaps more deeply than many readers wish to go on a particular strand of a subject. So the essay is a way of, originally it comes from the word essay, to try to test something out.
Let's bring in publisher Rosalind Porter now. Rosalind, then, thinking of this through the lens of an essay, what of your books do you feel best exemplifies what your company does?
Thank you, Georgina. It's a great question, because I believe, just echoing what Kim said there, an essay can kind of be anything. We think of it as a very sort of rigid form, but it's very fluid. 3 books that I'd love to sort of just talk about very briefly are one book called Things I Don't Want to Know by Deborah Levy, Booker shortlisted author Deborah Levy. And this is a response to George Orwell's famous 1946 essay, Why I Write. And it's fair to describe, I think, as a kind of literary experiment that probably wouldn't have worked in a longer form. It's a book that moves between 3 countries and through time. And I think its length enforces its tightness as a piece of writing. And it's also a book that one reviewer said was so beautifully produced, it would put Kindle out of business, which I highly agree with. Another is a book called How Shostakovich Changed My Mind. And you can almost hear in the title that these are very enigmatic, genre-defying books that are almost impossible to describe, because they weave together, this one in particular, weaves together a personal story of the author's struggle with depression with an exploration of the power of Shostakovich's music during Stalin's reign of terror, which sounds sort of like an impossible feat. But in the hands of a great essayist, miracles can be performed and great books can be written. And finally, I'd like to highlight a book that was published fairly recently called The Penalty Kick by Robert McCrum. Robert McCrum's great-grandfather invented football's penalty kick, which is a kind of fascinating sort of thing to have in your family history. But the story itself is too small to be a full-length book and far too complex to be a magazine piece. So as an extended essay, it works perfectly in our little essay book format.
Excellent. And Kim, so going forward, what can we expect from Notting Hill Editions?
Well, I think it would be good, actually, if we've got this wonderful new series, which is a slight departure. It's still very much essays, but in a very slim paperback format. But I think I'll let Ros talk to you about those, because she's been working closely on them.
Rosalind.
Yes. So usually the hardbacks that we've been discussing are usually around sort of 40,000 words long, which for readers is about sort of 180 pages. And we found that quite often asking writers to write an essay, that was a slightly too long a format, even though we think of them as short books. Writers would kind of go 40,000 words for an essay. So we decided to commission shorter essays of between sort of 10 and 20,000 words, which works out to be sort of almost 90 pages sometimes, very small books. And of course, we can't publish a very, very small book physically in our hardback format. It just physically isn't possible. So without compromising on our sort of ethos, we are this, the publisher of beautiful books. We've designed a series of sort of slim paperbacks, which still look really, really lovely. They're collectible. You can put them in your pocket. You can take them on the tube and read them. We just published one by Julian Barnes called Changing My Mind. And forthcoming titles include a book by Tom McCarthy, Amanda Craig, Xiaolu Guo. These are all writers who have been shortlisted or won major literary prizes. And it really shows how what I like to call sort of big A-list authors really want to write in this form. It's like, it sort of gives them a break, I think, from writing their big novels or their big nonfiction books for their regular publishers, and gives them something that they can experiment with.
Absolutely. And Kim, is there an audience for it? Who's reading these essays?
Oh, I mean, what's wonderful about our books is that when you go to one of our launches, for example, you will see all kinds of people. It's been really, I think, we publish, if you compare the readers of our a book called I Remember by cult classic by Joe Brainard. The people who read that may be completely different to the people who would read, Oscar Wilde. But they're all just lovers of beautiful literature and beautiful books. They range hugely in age. So I think we have a real cross-section.
Excellent. Kim Kremer and Rosalind Porter of Notting Hill Editions, many thanks for joining us. Vinny, I wonder if you've read or watched anything that's really stayed with you recently.
So I have been watching a show which has been getting a lot of sort of tension in the US because of parallels with what has been going on over recent years. And I will say I'm not a Star Wars fan at all. I never really have been. This is set in the Star Wars universe, but you can literally watch it without ever having watched any other Star Wars. The show is called Andor. It's written and directed by the same director who's done some great work, the Bourne films. He sort of wrote all of those. And it's basically about the formation of rebellion. It's about acts of resistance. It's also about how state intelligence agencies can operate against their own populations. It is like John le Carré in space. Bill Skarsgård is in it. It's got a really brilliant cast. And it's amazing because the second season is out now. And it sort of really shifts, it's sort of really each sort of 2-3 episodes there's a significant shift and it really pulls you along, and I sort of thoroughly recommend it. And the other thing I went to last night, Sam Fender, who is a Geordie, so he's from Newcastle in the UK. He played his biggest show ever last night. It was the London Olympic Stadium, around 80,000 people there. He's got a new album out called People Watching, which is really good. His past work is excellent as well. It's cliche, but it's best to describe him as like a young British Bruce Springsteen. He sort of writes with a bit of a political edge as well. Songs about the UK's welfare system, songs about being stuck in Aldi during social distancing. He has a song called Hypersonic Missiles, which he finished on, which, he wrote in 2018, which talks about the world feeling like it's on the edge of war, and he sort of says, I can't believe 7 years later, this feels even closer and even more prescient. But he's a really interesting guy. He did a fantastic thing last night as well. It's a slower song that he brought out a Durham pit band, all the sort of pit towns that are in the UK, these old towns, all those pits closed in the 1980s, but they had these amazing marching brass bands. It was a real tradition. And County Durham was the real heart of that. Durham is near to Newcastle. It's where his grandparents are from. And he brought out this traditional Durham pit band to do a song. And it was in a stadium like that, it just sounded incredible.
Wow. Last night, I'll tell you what I was up to. I was in Buckingham, which is not a town I know well. It has a literary festival, which officially kicks off next weekend. But they were having a pre-festival event. And I went up to chair an event with Robin Ince. How did I nearly forget his name? The co-presenter with Brian Cox of The Infinite Monkey Cage on Radio 4, written this wonderful book, really about his own ADHD diagnosis and everything. And it was quite an extraordinary session because it was almost impossible to ask him a question. I mean, he wouldn't answer. His ADHD, which he's rightly proud of, would just take him off into just many, many different directions. And then there's another pre-festival event happening on Wednesday where I'll be talking to Andrei Kirkov, the Ukrainian writer, who'll be joining us on screen from Kyiv, and Christina Lamb, the journalist who, and I think that's shaping up to be a lovely event with the three of us know each other well and have done a lot of stuff together. So that's going to be something that's online in conjunction with Open University. And then this weekend, Buckingham Lit Fest gets underway, so that's all going on. But there's also JLF in London, which is the Jaipur Literary Festival at the British Library. So many fascinating events here. I'll just give you a flavour. Saad Mohseni, who's the man who ran Radio Free Afghanistan, is going to be there talking to Lucy Hanna and Batul Hadari, who are part of this collective that brought all the writings of these Afghani women together. And I'll be in conversation with them. And then on the Sunday, there's a wonderful kind of political panel. I'll be speaking to the former, I think he was the foreign minister of Portugal, Bruno Machiche, and various other politicians and academics and so on. And we'll be basically speaking about just what happens. It's crisis in the age of chaos. Steve Tang will be on there as well, who's often a guest here on Monocle. David Rhodes, Shashi Tharoor, of course, the Indian politician. So lots of fantastic events coming up very, very soon, which is wonderful. And of course, Hay is just finished. I wonder what it is, Vinny, what you think it is that drives people in this age where we can, pick up a book and read it in solitude or watch television, that still drives people out to these live events?
Oh, I mean, that's such a good question. I think when you think about when we were all locked in our homes for that period in the pandemic, what people missed was connection and going to events. And you have seen bumper audiences that think, I'm going to Glastonbury for the very first time this month. I've been trying to get tickets for years. And things like that now, and I'm sure it's the same for literary festivals. It's the same for things like the Chelsea Flower Show and Wimbledon and the Olympics I was at last year. There is such an over demand for going to these big things. People do want to go to them. I think it's maybe because there aren't even if you go back a decade, there aren't that many big unifying cultural moments anymore. You think, in a year's span, you might get an Olympics or a World Cup on the sports side. That's a kind of a big global event. You might get, for Europe, you've got Eurovision and things like that. But it's very hard to find, we don't have monocultures anymore. Culture is very much spread, which means you kind of have to find people to talk about the things that you're interested in. So I guess part of it is that, just wanting to sort of find other people. It's, because we all of our niches in this age of, mass publishing, streaming, all of our niches are catered for. But that does mean that people are kind of more geographically distant and less likely to be kind of in your orbit. So maybe it's that.
Absolutely. Vinny, thank you for being with me today. I'm sure you'll be back on the air and we'll be together again very, very soon. That's all for this edition of Monocle on Saturday. Many thanks once again to my guests, Vincent McAviney, Kim Kremer and Rosalind Porter. Thanks also to our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan. Monocle on Saturday returns at the same time next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Goodbye and thanks for listening.